The wagon wheels creaked and groaned as they rolled over the rocky path. Sarah Mitchell held tight to her worn carpetbag and tried not to cry. The Montana Territory stretched out before her like an endless sea of grass and sky. She had never seen so much empty land in her whole life. The wagon driver was a kind old man named Pete. He had picked her up at the train station in town 3 hours ago. Pete kept looking at her with worried eyes. Sarah knew she must look terrible. Her black dress was dusty and wrinkled. Her face was thin from not eating enough. Her hands were rough from all the work she had done trying to save her farm back. "In Ohio, you sure about this, miss?" Pete asked for the third time. "The Lazy Creek Ranch is pretty far out." "Not many women folk around these parts." Sarah nodded. She had to be sure. She had nowhere else to go. When her husband Tom died from the fever 6 months ago, everything fell apart. The bank took their farm. The store owners wanted their money. Sarah had sold everything she owned just to buy a train ticket west. All she had left was a letter. Tom had written it before he died. In the letter, he told her about his old friend, Jake Sullivan. Tom and Jake had worked together on a ranch in Montana years ago. Tom said Jake was a good man who would help if Sarah ever needed it. Sarah had never met Jake Sullivan. She did not even know if he would remember Tom, but the letter was all she had. She had spent her last coins on the train ticket to Montana Territory. "There it is," Pete said, pointing ahead. Sarah looked up and saw the ranch. It was bigger than she had expected. There was a large wooden house with a wide porch. Several smaller buildings were scattered around it. She could see horses in a fenced area and cattle dotting the distant hills, but what caught her attention was the man standing near the barn. He was tall and lean, wearing a brown hat pulled low over his face. Even from far away, she could tell he was watching their wagon approach. "That there is Jake Sullivan," Pete said quietly. "The foreman. Good man, but keeps to himself. Hasn't said more than 10 words to anyone in years." Sarah's heart sank. How could she ask for help from a man who did not like to talk? The wagon stopped near the house. The tall man walked over slowly. Sarah could see his face now under the hat brim. He looked to be about 40 years old. His skin was dark from the sun. His eyes were a deep blue, but they looked sad somehow. "Afternoon, Jake," Pete said cheerfully. "Got a visitor for you." Jake Sullivan looked at Sarah but did not speak. He just waited. Sarah climbed down from the wagon. Her legs shook a little. She was so nervous and tired. She reached into her bag and pulled out Tom's letter. "Mr. Sullivan," she said softly. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was married to Tom Mitchell. He said you two worked together years ago." Jake's blue eyes widened a little. He took the letter from her hands. His fingers were rough and calloused. He read the letter slowly. Sarah watched his face, but she could not tell what he was thinking. The letter was short. Tom had written it when he knew he was dying. He told Jake about Sarah and asked him to help her if she ever came to Montana. Tom said Sarah was a hard worker who knew about farming and taking care of animals. Jake folded the letter carefully. He looked at Sarah for a long moment. She tried to stand straight even though she was so tired she could hardly keep her eyes open. "I can work," Sarah said quickly. "I know about cows and chickens. I can cook and clean. I don't need much money. Just a place to sleep and some food." Jake still did not speak. He looked at Pete, then back at Sarah. Pete cleared his throat. "Well, I better get going," Pete said. "Sun's getting low." He looked at Sarah with kind eyes. "You take care, miss." Sarah watched the wagon drive away. Now she was alone with this silent man. She did not know what to do. She had come so far and spent all her money. If Jake Sullivan said no, she would have nowhere to go. Jake started walking toward the barn. After a few steps, he stopped and looked back at her. He nodded toward the barn. Sarah picked up her bag and followed him. The barn was big and clean. There were several cows inside, along with some chickens in a corner pen. Jake led her to a small room at the back of the barn. It had a narrow bed, a small table, and a chair. It was simple but clean. Jake pointed to the room, then to Sarah. He was telling her she could stay there. Thank you, Sarah whispered. She was so relieved she almost started crying. Jake showed her around the barn. He pointed to the cows and made a milking motion with his hands. He showed her where the feed was stored and where to get fresh water. Everything he needed to tell her, he showed with his hands and nods. He never spoke a single word. Sarah understood. He was giving her a job taking care of the dairy cows. She would milk them and feed them and keep them healthy. As the sun began to set, Jake left the barn. Sarah sat on the small bed and looked around her new home. It was not much, but it was better than sleeping on the street. She had a roof over her head and work to do. She thought about Tom and how he had tried to take care of her even after he died. The letter had worked. Jake Sullivan remembered her husband and was willing to help. Sarah unpacked her few things. She had 2 other dresses, some underclothes, a brush for her hair, and a small Bible that had been her mother's. That was everything she owned in the world. Through the barn window, she could see lights coming on in the ranch house. She wondered about Jake Sullivan. Why did he not speak? What had happened to make him so quiet and sad? She also wondered about the other people on the ranch. She had seen a few men working with the horses and cattle. Would they be kind to her? Would they accept a strange woman who had shown up with nothing but a letter and a carpetbag? Sarah knelt beside the bed and said her prayers. She thanked God for bringing her safely to the ranch. She prayed for strength to work hard and prove she belonged here. She prayed for Tom's soul and asked him to watch over her. When she finished praying, Sarah lay down on the narrow bed. She was more tired than she had ever been in her life. But for the first time in months, she felt a tiny bit of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could build a new life here in Montana Territory. Outside, she could hear the gentle sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Horses moved quietly in their stalls. Cattle lowed softly in the distance. It was peaceful in a way that made her heart feel less heavy. Sarah closed her eyes and fell into the deepest sleep she had known since Tom died. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was safe. That was enough for now. Sarah woke up before sunrise. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she heard the cows moving around in the barn and remembered everything. She was at the Lazy Creek Ranch in Montana Territory. She had a job and a place to sleep. She got dressed quickly and went to look at the cows. There were 6 of them, all brown and white. They looked at her with big, gentle eyes. Sarah had milked cows back on her farm in Ohio, so she knew what to do. She found the milking bucket and stool where Jake had shown her yesterday. The first cow was patient while Sarah milked her. The warm milk filled the bucket with a steady rhythm. It felt good to have work to do with her hands. As she was milking the second cow, she heard footsteps. Jake Sullivan appeared in the doorway of the barn. He watched her for a moment, then nodded. Sarah thought the nod meant she was doing a good job. Jake brought her a plate of food from the ranch house. There were eggs, bacon, and thick slices of bread. Sarah had not eaten so much food in months. Her stomach was not used to it, but it tasted wonderful. Thank you, she said to Jake. He nodded again and left without speaking. Sarah finished milking all the cows. Then she fed them hay and made sure they had fresh water. By the time she was done, the sun was fully up and she could hear voices from around the ranch. She walked outside and saw 3 men working with the horses. They looked at her with curious eyes but did not say anything. Sarah felt shy and stayed near the barn. Around noon, Jake came back. This time he had another man with him. The man was older and had gray hair. He walked with a slight limp. "This is Cookie," Jake said quietly. Sarah was surprised to hear Jake speak. His voice was deep and rough, like he did not use it very often. Cookie smiled at her. "Real name's Jim Cook, but everyone calls me Cookie on account of I do all the cooking around here. Jake tells me you're Tom Mitchell's widow." Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir." "Tom was a good man," Cookie said. "Sorry for your loss." "Jake says you know about cows and such." "Yes, sir. I had a farm back in Ohio with my husband." Cookie looked at the cows and then at the barn. Everything was clean and neat. The cows looked content. "Looks like you know what you're doing," Cookie said. "You need anything, you just ask." We don't get many women folk out here, but you're welcome." Sarah felt relief wash over her. At least one person on the ranch was willing to talk to her and be kind. "There's a creek about a quarter-mile that way," Cookie pointed west. "Good for washing clothes and such. The privy is behind the barn. Meals are at the house, sunrise, noon, and sunset. Jake will show you." After Cookie left, Jake lingered near the barn. He seemed to want to say something but could not find the words. Finally, he just pointed toward the creek and made a washing motion with his hands. Sarah understood. He was telling her she could go wash her clothes and herself at the creek if she wanted. "Thank you," she said again. That afternoon, Sarah walked to the creek. It was beautiful there. The water was clear and cold. Trees grew along both sides, giving shade from the hot sun. Sarah washed her extra dress and hung it on a tree branch to dry. Then she washed her hair and felt human again for the first time. In weeks, when she got back to the barn, she found fresh hay bales stacked neatly near the cow stalls. Jake must have brought them while she was gone. He had also left a bucket of fresh water and some grain for the chickens, Sarah realized. Jake was taking care to make sure she had everything she needed for her work. Even though he did not talk, he was being kind in his own quiet way. That evening, she went to the ranch house for dinner. The 3 men she had seen earlier were there, along with Jake and Cookie. They all took off their hats when she walked in. "Boys, this is Sarah. Cookie. Sud. She's taking care of the dairy for us." The men introduced themselves. There was Bill, a young man with red hair who took care of the horses. There was Pete, a different Pete than the wagon driver, who was older and missing 2 fingers on his left hand. And there was Sam, who was about 30 and had kind brown eyes. They were all polite to Sarah, but she could tell they were not used to having a woman around. They spoke quietly and minded their manners more than they probably usually did. Jake sat at the end of the table. He ate his food and listened to the others talk, but he did not join in the conversation. Sometimes Sarah caught him looking at her, but he would look away quickly when their eyes met. After dinner, Sarah helped Cookie wash the dishes. The other men went outside to smoke and talk. Jake disappeared without saying good night. "Don't mind Jake," Cookie said quietly as they worked. "He's been like that for near 20 years now. Had some tragedy in his past that changed him. He's a good man, though, fair and honest, works harder than anyone." Sarah wanted to ask what kind of tragedy, but she did not think it was her place to know. Everyone had their secrets and their pain. Over the next few days, Sarah settled into a routine. She got up early to milk the cows and take care of them. She ate meals with the men. She washed clothes at the creek and mended things that needed fixing. Jake brought her supplies without being asked. Fresh hay, grain for the chickens, a new milking stool when he noticed the old one was wobbly. He never spoke except to nod or point. But Sarah began to understand his way of communicating. Sometimes she would look up from her work to find him watching her from across the ranch yard. He would check on the cows when she was not around, making sure they were healthy and had what they needed. Sarah realized he was being protective of her in his quiet way. The other men began to warm up to her. Bill would stop by the barn to chat about the horses. Pete taught her how to fix a broken harness. Sam always tipped his hat and smiled when he saw her, but it was Jake who fascinated her most. She could see there was pain behind his blue eyes. She wondered what had happened to make him so silent and alone. Sometimes when he thought no one was looking, his face would show such sadness that it made Sarah's heart ache, that she began to look forward to the moments when Jake would appear at the barn. Even though he rarely spoke, there was something comforting about his presence. He made her feel safe in this wild, lonely place. One evening after dinner, Sarah was sitting outside the barn watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink she had never seen back in Ohio. Jake appeared beside her so quietly she did not hear him coming. They sat in silence for a long time, both watching the beautiful sky. Finally, Jake spoke. "Tom was a good friend," he said softly. They were the first real words he had said to her since that first day. "He spoke of you often," Sarah replied. "He said you were the most honest man he ever knew." Jake was quiet for another long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry about what happened to him, and to you." "Thank you," Sarah whispered. They sat together until the stars came out. Neither of them spoke again, but Sarah felt like something had changed between them. Some barrier had started to come down. When Jake finally got up to leave, he paused beside her chair. "You're doing good work with the cows," he said. It was the closest thing to praise Sarah had heard from them. She smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Jake," he corrected quietly. "Just Jake." After he left, Sarah sat under the stars for a while longer. She thought about Tom and how he would be glad to know she was safe. She thought about Jake and the sadness in his eyes. And she thought about how strange it was that in this lonely place, surrounded by quiet men and endless sky, she was starting to feel less alone than she had in months. Sarah had been at the ranch for 3 weeks when the storm came. She woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of thunder rolling across the sky like a freight train. Lightning lit up her small room in bright flashes. The wind howled around the barn, making the wooden walls creak and groan. The cows were restless. Sarah could hear them moving around and making nervous sounds. She got up and lit the oil lamp to check on them. Their eyes were wide with fear, and they pressed together in the corner of their stall. "It's all right, girls," Sarah said softly, trying to calm them. "It's just a storm. It will pass." But the storm was getting worse. The thunder was so loud it made the ground shake. The wind was strong enough to rattle the barn doors. Sarah had never seen weather like this back in Ohio. She was trying to soothe the most frightened cow when she heard a different sound outside. It was the sound of many hooves running fast. The cattle were spooked by the storm and running wild. Sarah grabbed her shawl and ran outside. The rain hit her like cold needles. In the flashes of lightning, she could see the cattle running toward the barn. Their eyes were wild with panic, and they were not thinking clearly. Without stopping to think, Sarah ran toward them. She waved her arms and shouted, trying to turn them away from the barn where the dairy cows were kept. If the wild cattle crashed into the barn, her gentle cows could be hurt or killed. "Go back! Go back!" she yelled over the sound of the storm. The cattle saw her and started to turn, but one big bull was not paying attention. He was running straight at Sarah with his head down. She could see his huge body coming toward her through the rain and lightning. Sarah tried to jump out of the way, but her foot slipped in the mud. She fell hard and looked up to see the bull almost on top of her. She closed her eyes and waited for the terrible impact. Instead, she heard a man's voice shouting her name. "Sarah!" Strong arms grabbed her and pulled her out of the way just as the bull thundered past. Sarah found herself pressed against the man's chest, his arms wrapped tightly around her. She looked up and saw Jake's face above her, his blue eyes wide with fear and anger. "What were you thinking?" he said, his voice louder than she had ever heard it. "You could have been killed." Sarah was shaking from cold and shock. She had never seen Jake so upset. His usual calm was completely gone. "The cows," she said through chattering teeth. "I had to protect the dairy cows." Jake looked at her like he could not believe what he was hearing. Then he scooped her up in his arms and carried her back to the barn. He set her down gently and lit the lamp with shaking hands. "You're hurt," he said, seeing blood on her arm where she had scraped it when she fell. "It's nothing serious," Sarah sighed, but Jake was already getting clean cloth and water to tend to her wound. His hands were very gentle as he cleaned the scrape and bandaged it. Sarah watched his face as he worked. She could see he was still upset, but there was something else there too. Something that looked like fear of losing her. "Why did you do that?" Jake asked quietly. "Those cattle could have trampled you to death." Sarah looked at him with surprise. These were the most words she had ever heard him speak at one time. "I couldn't let them hurt the dairy cows," she said. "Those cows depend on me to keep them safe." Jake finished bandaging her arm and sat back on his heels. He looked at her for a long moment. "They're just cows, Sarah. They can be replaced." "You can't." The way he said her name made her heart skip. There was something in his voice she had never heard before. Something warm and caring. Outside, the storm was still raging, but the cattle had moved away from the barn. Sarah and Jake sat in the lamplight, listening to the rain on the roof. "I'm sorry I scared you," Sarah said softly. Jake was quiet for a minute. Then he started talking, and once he started, the words seemed to pour out of him like water from a broken dam. 20 years ago I had a wife, he said, staring at his hands. Her name was Mary. She was going to have a baby. Our first baby. Sarah's heart clenched. She could hear the pain in his voice. There was a storm like this one, Jake continued. Mary was afraid the chickens would be killed by a falling tree, so she went out to bring them into the barn. A branch fell and hit her. She died, and the baby with her. Tears came to Sarah's eyes. Now she understood why Jake had been so upset to see her run toward danger. I couldn't save her, Jake said, his voice breaking. I couldn't save either of them. After that, I stopped talking to people, stopped caring about anything. It hurt. Too much. Sarah reached out and touched his hand. I'm so sorry, Jake. When I saw you out there tonight, running toward those cattle, it was like watching Mary all over again. I couldn't bear to lose someone else. He stopped talking and looked at her with wide eyes, like he had said more than he meant to. Someone else you what? Sarah asked gently. Jake's face turned red. Someone else I care about, he said quietly. Sarah's heart began to beat faster. Jake cared about her. This quiet, sad man who had not spoken to anyone for 20 years cared about her. I care about you too, Jake, she said softly. They looked at each other in the lamplight. For the first time since Sarah had arrived at the ranch, Jake's eyes did not look sad. They looked hopeful. I haven't felt this way in 20 years, Jake said. I thought I never would again. But then you came here and everything changed. Sarah thought about Tom and how much she had loved him. She had thought she would never love anyone again either. But sitting here with Jake, feeling the gentle way he had cared for her injury, seeing the concern in his eyes, she realized her heart was not as closed as she had thought. Mary wouldn't want you to be alone forever, Sarah said. Just like Tom. Wouldn't want me to be alone forever. Jake nodded slowly. Tom was lucky to have you. You're brave and kind and strong. You saved my life tonight, Sarah said. You gave me back mine, Jake replied. The storm began to quiet outside. The thunder moved farther away, and the rain became gentler. Sarah and Jake sat together in comfortable silence, both thinking about how much had changed in one night. I should let you get some sleep, Jake said finally. Jake? Sarah called as he got up to leave. Yes? Thank you for telling me about Mary. And the baby. I know it was hard. Jake looked at her with those blue eyes that were no longer completely sad. Thank you for listening, he said. I haven't talked about them in 20 years. After Jake left, Sarah lay in her narrow bed listening to the last of the storm move away. She thought about everything that had happened. The danger, Jake's fear. For her, the story of his terrible loss, and the way he had looked at her when he said he cared. She thought about Tom and how he had always told her that life was for the living. He would not want her to spend the rest of her life alone and sad. He would want her to find happiness again if she could, and maybe, just maybe, she could find that happiness with Jake Sullivan, a man who had learned to speak again because he was afraid of losing her. A man who had been hurt so badly he had stopped living, but who was now ready to try again. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. Tomorrow would bring new conversations, new possibilities, and the chance to see where this unexpected feeling might lead. For the first time since Tom died, she was excited about the future. After the storm, everything changed between Sarah and Jake. He still did not talk much around the other men, but when he was alone with Sarah, the words came easier. They would sit together in the evenings after the work was done, talking quietly. While the sun set behind the mountains, Jake told her about his life before Mary died, how he had been different then, talkative and full of dreams about building a big ranch and raising a family. Sarah told him about her life with Tom, their small farm, and how they had hoped to have children someday. Tom sounds like he was a good man, Jake said one evening as they sat by the creek. He was, Sarah agreed, but he's gone now and I'm still here. I have to keep living, Jake nodded. Mary used to say that too. She said life was too precious to waste being sad. As the weeks passed, Sarah noticed Jake changing in small ways. He smiled more often. He joined in conversations at dinner sometimes. The other men on the ranch noticed too. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up," Cookie told Sarah one day. "Haven't seen Jake this happy in 20 years. Sarah was happy too. She loved her work with the cows and she loved the peaceful life at the ranch. But most of all, she loved the growing closeness with Jake. He was gentle and kind, and she could see the good man he had been before tragedy changed him. Jake began to do little things for her. He fixed a loose board in her room. He brought her wildflowers he found on the range. He made sure she always had enough firewood for the cold mornings. One day, Sarah noticed Jake watching her work with a strange expression on his face. When she asked him what was wrong, he just shook his head. "Nothing's wrong," he said. "Everything's right, and that scares me." Sarah understood. It scared her too. She was falling in love with Jake Sullivan, and she could tell he was falling in love with her. But they were both afraid of being hurt again. The first real test came when Sarah got sick. It started as just a small cough, but within 2 days, she had a high fever and could barely get out of bed. Cookie brought her soup, but she was too sick to eat. Jake appeared at her bedside on the second day. His face was white with worry. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrible," Sarah admitted. Her voice was weak and hoarse. Jake sat down in the chair beside her bed. "I'm staying here until you're better." "You don't have to do that," Sarah protested. "You have work to do." "The work can wait. You're more important." For 3 days, Jake barely left her side. He brought her water when she was thirsty and cool cloths for her forehead when the fever was high. He read to her from an old book of poetry he found in the ranch house. When she had nightmares from the fever, he held her hand until she calmed down. Sarah had never had anyone take care of her like that. Even Tom, as much as he loved her, had not been so gentle and patient when she was sick. On the 4th day, the fever broke. Sarah woke up feeling weak but clear-headed. Jake was asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head resting on his arms. He looked exhausted. "Jake," she said softly. He woke up immediately and reached out to touch her forehead. It was cool. "Thank God," he said, and Sarah saw tears in his eyes. "You haven't slept in days," she said. "I couldn't sleep. I was too afraid of losing you." Sarah looked at this strong, quiet man who had risked his heart again because of her. She realized that what she felt for him was deeper than anything she had ever known, even with Tom. "You're not going to lose me," she said. Jake took her hand in both of his. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." "What?" "I love you. I know it's too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to say it. When you were so sick, I realized I can't live without you." Sarah's heart filled with joy. "I love you too, Jake. I've been afraid to say it because I felt guilty about Tom, but I know now that Tom would want me to be happy." Jake leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "Are you sure? I come with a lot of sadness and silence. I'm not easy to love." "You're the easiest man to love I've ever known," Sarah said. "You're kind and gentle and strong. You saved my life in more ways than one." As Sarah got better, their love grew stronger. They spent every free moment together, talking and sharing their dreams for the future. Jake began to speak more freely, and Sarah could see glimpses of the man he had been before tragedy silenced him, but their happiness was threatened when autumn arrived. The ranch work was slowing down as winter approached. Cookie mentioned that dairy work usually ended with the first snow, and hired help was let go for the winter months. Sarah tried not to think about it, but she knew she would have to leave soon. She had no money and nowhere to go. Jake knew it, too, and she could see the worry in his eyes. One evening in late October, as they sat watching the stars, Jake was quieter than usual. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. "Winter's coming," he said simply. "I know. You'll have to leave soon." Sarah's heart broke. She had known this day would come, but she had hoped something would change. Maybe Jake would ask her to stay. Maybe Cookie would find winter work for her. But it seemed like she would have to leave the only place she had ever been truly happy. "Where will you go?" Jake asked, his voice full of pain. I don't know, maybe back east. Find work in a town somewhere. Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up and began pacing back and forth. I can't let you go, he said suddenly. You have to. There's no work here in winter. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her. There could be... What do you mean? Jake took a deep breath. Marry me, Sarah. Sarah's heart stopped. What? Marry me. Be my wife. Then you won't be hired help anymore. You'll be family. You can stay forever. Sarah stared at him. Jake, are you sure? Marriage is forever? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Sarah. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to build a future together. Sarah thought about everything Jake was offering. A home, a family, a life with a man she loved deeply. But she also thought about the responsibility of being a rancher's wife in this wild country. It won't be easy, she said. Nothing worth having is easy, Jake replied. But we'll face it together. Sarah looked into his blue eyes and saw love, hope, and determination. This man who had been broken by loss was whole again because of love. Just as she was whole again because of him. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Jake picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time. It was gentle and sweet, and full of promise. When? Sarah asked. As soon as possible. Before the first snow. I don't want to spend one more day worried about losing you. They decided to have the wedding in 2 weeks. Cookie was so excited he volunteered to make a special dinner. The other ranch hands offered to help however they could as they made plans for their simple wedding. Sarah marveled at how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been a poor widow with nothing but a letter and a prayer. Now she was about to marry a good man who loved her and give her a home where she belonged. Tom would be happy for us, she told Jake one evening. I think he would be, Jake agreed. I think Mary would be too. They both wanted us to find happiness again, Sarah smiled. I can't wait to be your wife. I can't wait to call you my wife, Jake said, holding her close. Mrs. Jake Sullivan has a nice sound to it, Sarah laughed. It does indeed. 2 weeks felt like both forever and no time at all. But Sarah knew that when their wedding day came, she would be ready to start her new life as Jake's wife and partner on the Lazy Creek Ranch. The morning of Sarah's wedding day dawned clear and cold. The first snow had not yet fallen, but winter was coming soon. Sarah could see her breath in the air as she got ready in her small room in the barn. She had only one good dress, a dark blue one she had worn to church back in Ohio. Cookie's wife had come from town the day before to help Sarah get ready. Mrs. Cook was a kind woman who had brought white ribbons to put in Sarah's hair and some face powder to make her look special. You're a beautiful bride, Mrs. Cook said as she helped Sarah with her hair. Sarah looked at herself in the small mirror. She did look different. Her face had filled out from eating well at the ranch. Her skin was healthier from being outside, in the fresh air. But most of all, her eyes looked happy in a way they had not since Tom died. I'm nervous, Sarah admitted. That's natural, Mrs. Cook said. Marriage is a big step. But Jake Sullivan is a good man. He'll take care of you. Sarah knew that was true. In the weeks since they had gotten engaged, Jake had shown her over and over how much he loved her. He talked more now, sharing his thoughts and dreams. He made plans for their future together. He treated her like she was precious. There was a knock on the door. Sarah, you ready? It was Cookie's voice. Almost, Sarah called back. Mrs. Cook put the finishing touches on Sarah's hair and stepped back. Perfect. Jake won't be able to take his eyes off you. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door. Cookie was waiting outside in his best suit. He had offered to walk her to the ranch house where the wedding would take place. You look beautiful. My dear, Cookie said with a big smile. They walked across the ranch yard together. Sarah could see people gathered on the porch of the ranch house. The other ranch hands were there, along with a few neighbors who had come for the ceremony. The preacher from town was there too, a kind old man named Reverend Williams, but Sarah only had eyes for Jake. He was standing at the end of the porch, wearing a black suit she had never seen before. His hair was neatly combed and his face was clean-shaven. When he saw her coming, his whole face lit up with the most beautiful smile Sarah had ever seen. Jake stepped forward to meet her. Cookie placed Sarah's hand in Jake's and stepped back. "You look perfect," Jake whispered to Sarah. "So do you," she whispered back. Reverend Williams began the ceremony. Sarah tried to pay attention to his words, but mostly she just looked at Jake. This quiet, gentle man was about to become her husband. In a few minutes she would be Mrs. Jake Sullivan, and this ranch would be her home forever. "Do you, Jake Sullivan, take Sarah Mitchell to be your wife, to love and cherish her in sickness and in health, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Jake said in a strong, clear voice. "Do you, Sarah Mitchell, take Jake Sullivan to be your husband, to love and cherish him in sickness and in health, for better or worse, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Sarah said, her voice full of joy. Jake had bought a simple gold ring. In town, it was not fancy, but it was beautiful to Sarah. He slipped it onto her finger with hands that shook just a little. "By the power given to me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake leaned down and kissed Sarah gently. Everyone on the porch cheered and clapped. Sarah felt like her heart might burst. With happiness. After the ceremony, they went inside for the special dinner Cookie had prepared. There was roast beef, potatoes, vegetables from the ranch garden, and even a small cake Cookie had somehow managed to make. It was the best meal Sarah had ever eaten. The men told stories and made toasts to the new couple. Bill played his harmonica, and Sam sang a song. Even Pete, who was usually quiet, made a speech about how happy he was to see Jake smiling again. 20 years ago, we thought we'd lost our Jake forever, Pete said. But Sarah brought him back to us. That's the best wedding gift anyone could ask for. As the evening went on, the guests began to leave. The neighbors had to get home before dark. The ranch hands drifted off to their own quarters, leaving Jake and Sarah alone in the ranch house. Jake had moved his things out of his old room and into the main bedroom, which would now be theirs to share. Sarah felt shy about it, even though she had been married before. This was different. This was Jake. "Are you happy?" Jake asked as they stood together in their new bedroom. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Sarah said honestly. Jake took her hands in his. "I want you to know something. I never thought I would love anyone again after Mary died. I thought that part of my heart was dead forever. But you brought it back to life." "You did the same for me," Sarah said. "After Tom died, I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, but you showed me that hearts can love more than once." They talked quietly as they got ready for bed. Jake was patient and gentle, never pushing Sarah to be comfortable with their new life together faster than she was ready. "Tell me about your dreams," Sarah said as they lay in bed that first night as husband and wife. "I want to build this ranch into something special," Jake said. "I want to raise the best cattle in Montana territory. I want to build a bigger house where we can raise children if God blesses us with them. I want to grow old with you and never take a single day for granted." "Those are beautiful dreams," Sarah said. "I want to help you make them all come true." "What about your dreams?" Jake asked. Sarah thought for a moment. "I want to be a good wife to you. I want to help make this ranch successful. I want to have a family with you. And I want to prove that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can lead to the best things." Jake pulled her close. "I love you, Mrs. Sullivan." "I love you too, Mr. Sullivan." The next morning, Sarah woke up as the sun was rising. For just a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw Jake sleeping beside her and remembered. She was married. She was home. She got up quietly and went to check on the cows, just as she had every morning for months. But now everything was different. Now she was not just hired help taking care of someone else's animals. She was a partner in this ranch, helping to build something that belonged to both of them. Jake found her in the barn a few minutes later. He was already dressed and ready for the day's work. "Good morning, wife," he said, kissing her cheek. "Good morning, husband," Sarah replied, loving the sound of the word. As winter settled over the ranch, Jake and Sarah began their new life together. They worked side by side during the day and talked by the fire in the evenings. Jake taught Sarah about ranching, and she shared her knowledge of farming and managing a household. The other men accepted Sarah as Jake's wife and the lady of the ranch. They came to her when they needed something mended or when they were sick. She became like a mother and sister to these lonely men who had no families of their own. When spring came, Sarah discovered she was going to have a baby. Jake was so happy he could hardly speak. He was also terrified, remembering what had happened to Mary and their unborn child. "This time will be different," Sarah assured him. "I'm strong, and you're here to take care of me. I'll never let anything happen to you or our baby," Jake promised. As Sarah's belly grew round with their child, Jake became even more protective and loving. He did all the heavy work so Sarah would not strain herself. He made sure she ate well and got plenty of rest. Their son was born on a beautiful autumn day, exactly 1 year after their wedding. Jake held the tiny baby with tears running down his face. "He's perfect," Jake whispered. "What should we name him?" "Thomas," Sarah said. "After the man who brought us together," Jake nodded. "Thomas Sullivan, I like it." As they sat together with their new son, Sarah thought about the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything she thought mattered, only to find something even better. She had come to Montana Territory as a desperate widow with nothing but a letter and a prayer. Now she was a wife, a mother, and a partner in a thriving ranch. "Are you happy?" Jake asked, the same question he had asked on their wedding night. Sarah looked at her husband, their beautiful son, and the life they had built together. Through the window, she could see the ranch spreading out under the big Montana sky. This was home. This was family. This was love that had grown from loss and pain into something stronger and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. "I'm more than happy," Sarah said. "I'm blessed." Jake smiled and kissed her forehead. "So am I, so am I." Outside, the wind blew across the plains, carrying the sounds of cattle and horses and the promise of all the tomorrows they would share together. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of her new life, knowing that sometimes the best endings are really just the beginning of something even better.